Okay, well, let's go. Hi, everyone. I'm Andy Revkin from the Columbia Climate School, and I'm a journalist. I write at a thing called revkin.bulletin.com after 21 years at the New York Times and elsewhere. I want to introduce a translator who will offer special capacity for today's plenary, and before I say anything more. So Alejandro, over to you briefly.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us. My name is Alejandro, and today I'm here with Maria Elisa. Hola a todos, mi nombre es Alejandro, estoy aquí con María Elisa. Gracias por tenernos con ustedes. We will be your Spanish, English simultaneous interpreters for today. So that means that in this space, we may have both English and Spanish specifically. So if you prefer one of those languages, we encourage you to select the globe icon that will appear on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. You may not see it quite yet, but it'll pop up after these instructions. You'll be able to select English if you're a monolingual English speaker, and then hit mute original audio right below so that you only listen to the language of your preference. That way, when another language is spoken, or specifically Spanish, you'll be prepared to hear that simultaneous interpretation into English. Hola a todos, como estaba diciendo en inglés, vamos a tener una reunión bilingüe en inglés y en español específicamente. Si ustedes prefieren escuchar en español, van a poder seleccionar el icono de globo o mundo en la parte inferior de su pantalla. No lo van a ver aún, pero después de las instrucciones va a aparecer. Van a poder seleccionar el español y poner el audio original en mudo justo abajo para que solamente escuchen el idioma de su preferencia. I'll go ahead and send this quickly in writing in the chat in case that's helpful for folks. Les voy a mandar esto en escrito los mensajes de chat por si les ayuda. But with that, we'll go ahead and turn that on and give you all a few seconds to select your language. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Thank you. So hopefully everyone can hear me, and hopefully you'll be able to hear the presenters in a moment. This session is part of the Natural Hazards Center workshop on changing climates, equity and adaptation in a warming world. This plenary is on the move, climate relocation and social justice. One thing I've learned as a journalist who's been writing about climate change since the 1980s, yes, I am a graybeard actually, is I focused way too much on the climate system. The first 20 years of my writing was about global warming, greenhouse gases. Then I started talking to social scientists, to geographers, psychologists, historians, and it was a really sobering wake-up call that the social climate, for better or worse, is by far the bigger determinant of who wins, who loses, who's hurt, who's killed, whose prosperity is impeded. And it's not just some simple facts. It's what are the drivers of putting people into situations where they face higher risk. Those factors, the social climate and the physical climate together, have to be studied and dissected and to get paths forward. And the paths are there. You don't see a lot of headlines around them but vulnerability reduction is a key. And one way is to move. The question is, does everyone have equal capacity to relocate? Who's in charge of relocation processes? I've talked increasingly in recent years with people like these panelists about this side of the story, and it's a critical conversation. Thank you for being part of it today, both the participants and those in the audience. Feel free to tweet away or make sure to take notes and push this out on social media later. We spend too much time debating what's going on with the hazard, not enough doing this kind of discussion. This plenary will focus on environmental and social justice dimensions of climate relocation. Fairness, equity, those are words that you'll hear quite a bit. We'll look at domestic and international case studies. And onward, I just want to get right to it. The panelists are great. We have limited time, although I will tell you that I'm hoping to build further sustain what webcasts based on what we hear today on my Columbia platform. Jola Ajibade is an assistant professor in geography at Portland State University. Kristen Marcel is the director of the Climigration Network, hosted by the Consensus Building Institute, which has done fantastic work even before the Climigration Network existed in fostering the capacity for communities to understand and engage on these problems on the ground. Erica Pires Ramos, who is a co-founder of the South American Network for Environmental Migrations, joins us from Sao Paulo, the city I love. my time in Brazil. And A.R. Siders, an assistant professor at the University of Delaware and the Disaster Research Center. Like at least one of our other panelists has a law degree to bring to bear on these issues. And Siders goes by the name Siders as a first and only name sometimes. So it's not like I'm kind of doing something strange when I just call her Siders. So thanks to all of you for being here today. And thanks for inviting me, Lori Peak, and the others to help run the show. I'd like to start with offering everyone the opportunity to sort of explain how you got to be who you are so far. And we're all on evolutionary journeys here, as I explained a minute ago. And what keeps you up at night or drives you crazy in the morning or when you get on social media? What's the story or the solution that's not being told, the question that's not being interrogated, the partnership or collaboration that's not happening, that can happen? And maybe we'll start with you, Jola Ajibade. So greetings and a little snapshot of what made you you, and then again, what drives you forward? What's your driving question?
Thank you, Andy, and thank you everyone for being here. I really just want to thank the organizers of this event, and I want to thank Lori Peak for her hard work behind the scenes. She made all this magic and with others happen. So I'm really happy that we're here together to learn from one another and to share with one another. And Andy, your question is a very broad one, but also a very deep one. Who am I, or also why am I here and what led me here? I think it has always been that desire to see a more socially just society. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria, so I'm a Nigerian, and I grew up under a military regime. And we had so much struggles in our society, both in terms of environmental issues and pollution, caused by the oil company, caused by Shell, but also in terms of the political system. It really was just very, very unethical, very corrupt, and we didn't have, the oversight of, especially as youths, where we were going. And then, growing up, I became more interested because I was also experiencing flood in where I was living, and I had to relocate, over time. And so some of the work that I'm doing right now, I think my experience growing up and the fact that I've relocated multiple times, well, not too much, but 2 times in Nigeria, also just allows me to speak to this issue. And if it's okay with everyone, I will just go ahead with my presentation as well and just connect some of my own experiences with some of the things I've been learning and studying as a researcher. So I'm going to try and share my screen right now, and I hope that works. 1 second. Yeah, that works. And so again, thank you everybody for being here. It's really a pleasure to share some of this work that I've been doing and thinking with you. As academics, we always like to describe ourselves differently. So I'm an urban political ecologist, but also a feminist geographer. And a lot of my work lies at the intersection of disaster risk reduction, climate justice, climate gentrification, climate relocation. And I look at how relocation and other strategies are reshaping cities. And sometimes often in ways that reproduce colonial, post-colonial, and neoliberal legacies. So a lot of the work that I've written speaks to those types of issues. But today I really want to focus on, a crisis of injustices, but also how we can think about climate adaptation, social justice, or maybe an intersectional justice, not just social justice, and climate relocation, how these things come together. First, I want to remind us that we need to be mindful of the injustices of the causation of climate change, which many of us know, the injustices of the unequal impacts that many communities face, especially biker communities, low-income communities, and also the injustices of inaction when it comes to mitigation. But also when it comes to adaptation, there are struggles and challenges where certain actions when it comes to adaptation can also exacerbate vulnerability. So we need to keep that in mind. And when we think about climate change as a phenomenon, we also want to remember that climate change is linked to humanity's long history of inequality that is perpetuated by legacies of settlers' colonialism, slavery, and also by capitalism. And capitalism, as you know, is based on exploitation of people, of land, and of nature. And particularly for those of us that are in the US right now, we do know that a lot of this historical issues often intersect with place-based injustices as well, that are also intersecting with racialized processes and contemporary environmental degradation, industrial pollution, redlining, and relocation plans that often do not work for people in certain cases. So we want to be mindful of, the fact that even when we're talking about climate relocation, we want to make sure that those relocation does not repeat legacies of past historical injustices. So that's one thing I want to quickly mention. When you look at these two images right before you, one is Makoko in Lagos, Nigeria. It's not an image of flooding. It's an image of people living with water. They've often lived there, but it was just taken over the satellite. And then the other one is an image of a new news report that came up just recently about creating this floating city in the floating community in the Maldives. And I'm going to talk about those two issues and also talk about why relocation is important, but also the other issues that are going on in this space, in this conversation around adaptation. To build on that, when you look at this diagram, this is a diagram from the United Nations, it's not my work, but it says that the different futures lies ahead, right? Depending on whether we're able to stabilize global average temperature to +1.5 degrees or +2 degrees Celsius. But my issue is that these types of images, but also the discourse that underlie them, actually undermine or minimizes the fact that climate change impact is already being felt radically and severely by millions of people.
Rola, really quick, sorry to interrupt you, but the language interpreters have asked me to ask you to just slow down a little bit, please, with your language, because there's a delay in the...
thank you. I'm sorry, it's because we agreed that we're going to have 7 minutes, and so I was trying to keep to that 7 minute timeline, but I could definitely slow down. And
okay, thank you.
Thank you, interpreters. I will certainly slow down. So as I was saying, when we look at this type of image, which I think is trying to communicate an important information, but also sometimes the big picture, the big issues sometimes get missing, right? So the fact is that millions of people are already being impacted by climate change. So it's not like plus 1.5 degrees Celsius is a green world. Right now, we are experiencing those impacts. So resource-dependent communities, farmers, fishermen, many communities that depend on the land, they're seeing radical changes to their livelihood, to their health, to their safety, to their food security, to their well-being. And so it is important for us to acknowledge this issue that climate change is severely been, affecting communities across the world. The second issue is that the IPCC points out that, plus 1.5 degrees Celsius or going beyond that, certain adaptation strategies may no longer or may become useless, right? Which means that there will be need for relocation of some communities. But the key issue is how do we make relocation safe for people, but also how do we make sure that it actually allows people to build the kinds of life they want to build in new locations. So the things that I've talked about are some of the issues that I've seen, plus the fact that on the ground, a lot of relocations that are happening, some of them, we describe them in my work, some of them are failed because they were forceful relocation, there was no voluntary movement of people, and some actually exposed people to new disasters. But there are also other good stories. I think it's important to also capture some of those stories where relocation is happening, but they are also can be described as successful in some ways. Siders and I, we've published a special issue that captured a lot of the struggles around relocation. We also published a book. And then I also did some work, just recently opened this paper, will be out soon, that also tried to capture a variety of relocation that is going on in different parts of the world. And I think we captured about 130 or 135 cases. And we're trying to look at what makes relocation successful if people have to move based on what we're seeing in terms of the impact of climate change that is already happening. Not that would happen in 30 or 50 years, that is happening today. And people are moving because of that. So how do we make sure that those types of relocation are successful? And are there empirical evidence that shows that some of them can be successful? And based on this work, we found that there are some cases, or there are quite about 60 cases, the ones that we've documented here, that you have to describe them differently, but they are relatively successful. One of which is, and I'll explain all of these different topologies very quickly because we don't have time, but I'll slow down. There are cases where they are techno-managerial, where you move people from point A to point B. The problem with that is that it doesn't focus on equity or fairness, but it does get people out of danger or gets people out of certain exposure to hazards. So that's one. There are other cases where it's eco-restorative, where the relocation is actually not just about relocating people, also about restoring the land or restoring a part of the coast. So there are many cases like that across the world. And there are also cases where people talk about that in the US as buyouts, right? You have compensatory cases where people are either given money or land swap or housing swap or farm swap, where in exchange for them to move to a relatively safer location. And there are cases where you have communities coming together themselves to decide that, we've had enough of flooding, we've had enough of sea level rise impact on us, and we want to move. And we've seen these cases across the world. And some of those reformative cases actually also pay attention to issues of voluntariness. It pays attention to building new livelihoods in different locations. So they are relatively successful based on a number of indicators. And then there are cases that are transformative, where it doesn't only allow people to relocate voluntarily, but it reduces exposure to risks, improves living standard, and also reduces isolation, and still allows people to maintain connection to the land. So there are different kinds of cases, and they're all over the world, just as I mentioned before. You can see them here. But what is also important for us, since this panel is about justice, is that in this paper that, hopefully will be out soon, I wanted to understand there is the issue of success, but also is the issue of justice. You may relocate people and they may have this resource, but is it also just? And so we found that many relocations, not too many, I would say the transformative ones particularly, focus on recognition justice. It's important that we recognize those historical challenges that I mentioned in terms of the colonial settlers colonialism and the impact on people today. So recognition justice is important when we're thinking about managed retreats or when we're thinking about relocation. And also social justice, people having access to housing, having access to livelihood in new location is very important to people, so that relocation should also pay attention there, because that's the only thing that in many cases can motivate people to relocate. There is environmental justice, thinking about who will be benefiting from relocation in terms of decision making. Are they part of that decision making? But also in terms of the distributive benefits of relocation, are they going to benefit? So those justice issues are critical. And then there is also the issue of ecological justice, where we're thinking beyond human alone. We're thinking about more than humans. Where we're restoring the land, we're thinking about other species of plants and animals. How can relocation also allow for centering those types of justice issues as well? And there are issues around restorative justice, where relocation can actually also foster conversations around reparation for communities that have been marginalized historically. And there are also focus around intergenerational justice, where relocation can also allow for the generation of people that have moved, or the family that have moved, where you can also center the benefit for them going into the future. So what we found in some of the work that I've done was that the transformative case, which is two cases, did in two different degrees, paid attention to these different types of justice dimensions. And then the reformative ones paid attention to intergenerational justice, recognition justice, social justice, and environmental justice. In some of the work that we've done, the community had this conversation. In other ways, it's not just a conversation, it was actually what was implemented that reflected some of this attention. The compensatory cases that we defined as successful, a lot of those cases centered access to not just resources in terms of relocation, but also centered restoring the land, preserving the land when people relocate, so leaving the land in perpetuity. So we saw many of those types of cases as well. And when it comes to eco-restorative cases, there are also attention to obviously ecological justice, but also the benefit of preserving the ecology for next generation was key. But as one would expect, the techno-managerial case really didn't have any justice dimension per se. It was just about moving people from point A to B. And this leads me to 5 key messages. I'll quickly wrap up because I don't have time. One is that,
sorry.
I'll finalize in like 5 minutes.
Yeah, that's actually too long.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Yeah.
So from all of this, one of the key issues we want to bear in mind is that we need to account for multiplicities of perspectives and values, partly because some people may want to stay, some communities may decide to leave, some communities may want to leave, but they don't have the resources to leave. Some communities may want to leave now or in 10 years. We need to account for that when we're thinking about climate relocation. And also we need to make sure that, even when people leave, getting them the resources they need to thrive where they're going is important. I'll skip this. It's just to say that animals are also moving, not just people. So we need to be mindful of that. The second issue is that we don't have, while there are a number of guidelines globally on relocation, there are no national or local relocation policies and governance framework, at least in many countries, including the US. But why this is important, I'll just give a few reasons why this is important. Number one, when people, we don't know when, in situ adaptation is no longer possible and who determines that. When should people get buyouts, when and where, it's not often clear. And also, what level of damages must a community or home have before you get a buyout, for instance? What kinds of combination of hazards, or which hazards should we focus on or prioritize? It should be wildfire, should it be just flooding, should it be a sea level rise? Can people get buyout multiple times? So if I experience a disaster in North Carolina, for instance, on the coast, and I relocate, and then I move to Miami, to the coast, should I also get buyouts right after that? Those are things you want to think about. Also, are there locations that can be rebuilt, right? And where should we be rebuilding? And should people, and who should rebuild? That's another issue. Also, when we rebuild, will rebuilding also foster development in fragile areas? So that's another key issue. I'll wrap up very soon, I promise. And the issue about rebuilding is critical to this issue around, is it an opportunity? Is it also an elite capture? Across the world and many of the projects that I've been doing, I'm seeing a lot of cases where people are rebuilding on the coast. And the question is, when they rebuild on the coast, I'm not saying people shouldn't if they have the resources to do so. If there are disasters in this kinds of context, should they also get buyouts, for instance, if they get affected by tsunami? That's a conversation we need to have on what legal rules should really be used to determine these types of rebuilding or these types of new developments and floating cities elsewhere. And whatever decision we make, whether you decide to relocate techno-managerially or transformative or reformative, there are trade-offs across every scale and across different groups. When relocation happens, some community may increase pressure on housing, on social services, and on land in certain communities. And relocating communities and receiving communities may not necessarily get along. We need to be mindful of that. So there are trade-offs that has to be thought about. And finally, I promise, is that we also need to think about, solidarity science, which is really the core of where I'm going with this, this whole talk here. When COVID occurred in 2020, with the initial outbreak, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, said, it's a time for science and solidarity, because he says, a lot of people in the world are scared, they don't know who to turn to. But I would say in the context of climate change, there are many of us who are worried as well about today's climate, but also about the future climate. And sometimes it's not often clear where or who to turn to. And really, the way to address and move forward, I think, is really to think about bringing both science and solidarity together to really form what I call the solidarity science. And this is a science that works with communities, practitioners, and researchers to build a case for climate action on multiple scales, on mitigation and adaptation and resilience, and really to allow for a multiplicity of perspectives and knowledge system with how we advance. We know that adaptation does not end with relocation. Even when you relocate, there are those environmental, racial, economic justice issues that you still experience in new places. So how can we envision an alternative land future even when relocation is being done? And how can we also make sure that existing programs, whether it's about energy fund, whether it's about Justice 40 programs, how can we integrate justice and solidarity science and climate relocation conversation into those types of programs that focuses on helping low-income communities and helping racial groups as well. Thank you. I apologize for going beyond time, but thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Yeah, and that's it. Yeah.
That was really great. You broached some really important concepts there. You're reminding me of Dana Fisher's work at the University of Maryland on climate advocacy, and she studies climate advocacy as a tool for climate mitigation. I haven't seen the same conversation in the adaptation and relocation space, so that's very important. So Kristen, if we could have a brief sort of manifesto from you on what the network is about and your goals, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Andy. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here with such a wonderful group today. So my story, I was connected with the Climigration Network, which was just emerging in 2015 when I was in state service. I was working for the state of New York and for Cornell University. And I was feeling very challenged by the barriers we were facing to real partnership with communities and community leaders in that space. And the Climigration Network gave me a bit of a home to express the concerns I was feeling, both about the engagement process and about the fact that when we started trying to have conversations with communities in the Hudson River Valley about their existential threats, the conversations about moving simply, the conversation ended there. There was no one willing to talk about what moving might look like. And so we realized, I think, through the network connections that this was happening all over the country. And I became director, and I'm grateful to be in this role, in 2020. And when we were embarking on a strategic planning process to determine who we were going to be in the world. And part of that process was to engage community leaders, to compensate them to be interviewed so that we could better understand what the landscape looked like on the ground and figure out how we might best set ourselves up to address this challenge. So we had funding for interviews for 20 community leaders, and we were only able to find, through our networks and the consultants' community-based networks, 3 people who were willing to be paid to be interviewed on this topic. That's how challenging it was to have this conversation. So we've done a lot of learning since then. Our experience led us to partner with the Anthropocene Alliance, the Alaska Institute for Justice, and the Lowlander Center, and we are now in ongoing dialogues with community leaders to try to better understand what the situation is like on the ground. One of the most important pieces that we've done since then is this guidebook that was led by a team of experts in the communication and social justice field, led by Scott Shigioka and Michael Estrada. They partnered with over 40 people around the country who had faced climate displacement directly and interviewed them. And that work became a body of insights, both for community leaders who are trying to start conversations on climate migration, but I think more importantly for practitioners who might not have that direct lived experience. And one of the things that, both the guidebook and our leader dialogues have made very, very clear is that huge gaps in lived experience lead to huge gaps in our goals in the research, policy, and planning space. And similar to Andy's comments at the outset of this panel and Yola talking about justice and the procedural process, how important it is to get the storytelling process a big part of this process in order to recognize the history that's there and why people are making the decisions that they're making, which might be to stay in place in very dangerous situations. There are good reasons for that. Part of it is their experience, and part of it is how broken the systems are that should be supporting climate relocation. So we've learned a lot from this process. I think we will get into more of that as we embark on our discussion here as a group today. But the last thing I wanted to share, you can find both the guidebook and the leader statement that we produced with the Anthropocene Alliance members on the conditions that would be necessary to create more supportive systems for climate migration in the US on our website, as well as on the Anthropocene Alliance website. These are some of the quotes that came out of the dialogues that led to this leader statement. They were incredibly powerful conversations that really opened our eyes to a lot of what we weren't seeing as trained policy and planning and research professionals in this space. And so I encourage you to check those out, and I look forward to talking about this more as we get into our panel discussion. Thank you so much.
That's wonderful. And you're reminding me of, well, the journalists don't listen enough. You would think we listen all the time. But too often journalists are listening for the quote that they already want.
Yes.
And it's the dramatic point, not actually listening for content. You're also reminding me of Dana Fisher and others talking about qualitative data and the social sciences not getting enough respect in the overall climate science picture, because sometimes the data are interpretive. They're not. A lot of journalists I know, when they hear qualitative data, they go, "What the heck is that?" So that's a really important challenge too. Erica Perez Ramos, tudo bem? And what is on your mind when you think about this issue in the context of South America, Latin America?
¿Puedo empezar?
Un poco.
Yeah. Buenas tardes a todos y a todas. Para mí es un placer estar con ustedes. Gracias, Lori Peak of Natural Hazard Center. Es un gusto para mí también compartir con mis increíbles colegas, Spiders, Kristen, Joa.
Oh, shoot.
Ok. Estoy de regreso. Mi trabajo con Retama empezó en 2010, pero tengo que caminar pasos atrás para explicar un poco cómo empecé. Como Kristen ya dijo, empecé en 2005 muy impactada con los impactos y con las injusticias del huracán Katrina en Estados Unidos. Empecé mis estudios en esta temática y cambié todo mi camino, mi trayectoria de carrera para empezar a mirar la migración ambiental desde una perspectiva integral. Como ambientalista y defensora de los derechos de la naturaleza, para defender también los derechos de las personas impactadas por los cambios ambientales globales. En aquel momento, mi mirada era más internacional porque soy abogada, pero después empecé a trabajar con los desplazamientos internos, pero siempre desde una perspectiva regional y centrada en las personas. Y me gustaría compartir con ustedes un poco sobre mis percepciones sobre relocación climática. Porque la relocación climática ni siempre es una opción efectiva para distintas comunidades. Muchas veces la relocación climática es la opción de facto, pero oficialmente no es presentada como esta opción. Entonces, es muy importante pensar como mi compañera Kristen ya nos brindó la información de la importancia de la participación, por ejemplo, de las comunidades, no solo en el involucramiento, pero como la participación en la construcción de soluciones. Como abogada, esto es parte de la construcción de una política pública y no hay solución sin la consulta y el consentimiento de la comunidad, porque son sus derechos que son afectados. Entonces, las personas no son solo destinatarios de estos derechos, pero son los sujetos protagónicos de las políticas también, que los afecta a las personas mismas y a sus territorios. Entonces, me gustaría brindar a ustedes 3 situaciones, 2 en Brasil y una otra en Colombia, para visualizar mejor la relocación climática como opción y como una opción. En el caso de Brasil, por ejemplo, tengo 2 experiencias apoyando a investigadores y también involucrándome en las investigaciones que me ponen en la siguiente perspectiva, desde también escuchando las perspectivas de las comunidades y una en un ambiente de isla, en un área de protección, de preservación ambiental, que ya tratamos en el libro de Cydres y Chola, que es la comunidad de la Enseada de la Baleia, en Brasil. En este caso, por ejemplo, tenemos no una relocación regular, porque no fue planificada con el soporte gubernamental, pero planificada por la propia comunidad. Y esta solución no fue ofrecida por las autoridades estatales. La propia comunidad asumió el riesgo de permanecer en el territorio y a través de medidas judiciales logró quedarse, pero sin apoyo financiero, sin apoyo oficial de las autoridades, pero construyendo su propia red de solidaridad para esto. Entonces, este ejemplo es de una relocación que aunque considerada por la comunidad, no fue considerada por las autoridades, porque la primera opción de las autoridades fue moverse toda la comunidad a la ciudad periférica más cercana, y la comunidad resistió en el territorio, construyó su red de solidaridad, por ejemplo, y red de apoyo, y logró quedarse. Y desde una otra perspectiva, también en el estado de São Paulo, donde vivo, en áreas urbanas, en territorios frágiles, hay no una solución, pero hay una estrategia que las autoridades ponen a las comunidades, que es expulsión de comunidades, pero por medidas judiciales, lo que llamamos de eviction. Y a partir, por ejemplo, de la ciencia ciudadana que menciona Yola, hubo un trabajo colectivo entre academia, comunidades que estaban en riesgo de remoción y el Poder Judicial para evaluar estas metodologías para relocación o remoción de las comunidades, para que solamente se concretase si necesario. Muchas veces no hay una atención, no hay un diálogo comunitario, por ejemplo, y se reloca toda esta gente de manera muchas veces violenta, incrementando los conflictos y se transformando en un problema para la comunidad y para las autoridades también. Entonces, este grupo de una universidad de São Paulo, la UFMC, creó un guidebook, guidelines, revisando su propia metodología de análisis de riesgo para apoyar a la comunidad, pero de esta vez incluyendo la comunidad como parceros, como aliados en este proceso. Y es súper interesante los resultados, porque prácticamente reducieron el número de personas relocadas y removidas de las comunidades para un bajísimo número. Solamente la gente que estaba en riesgo muy alto, y en un proceso que promovió también la aceptación de la comunidad de este riesgo, porque se generó un proceso de confianza entre esas personas. Y esto también con la decisión, la confirmación del Poder Judicial y apenas solamente esas personas necesitarían de esta medida, preservando así el tejido comunitario más grande, por ejemplo, de esta misma comunidad. Entonces, creo que hay ejemplos de cómo podemos poner a la disposición de nuestras capacidades sin desconsiderar la gente hablando en primera persona. Desde Rezama, por ejemplo, en el caso de INSEADA de Valeria, nosotros desde Rezama, aunque tengamos capacidades muy limitadas, somos una red de investigadores que trabaja de manera voluntaria, no somos todavía una organización formal, pero intentamos combinar y aprender con las comunidades, pero considerando también sus narrativas, sus expectativas y sus demandas. Entonces, desde la producción de conocimiento, de contenido, de información, generación de evidencias, por ejemplo, tenemos también apoyado cómo podemos esas comunidades en sus proyectos y también en instrumentos jurídicos. El último, y después voy a poner en el chat para que lo miren, es el protocolo de consulta y consentimiento libre e informado de esta comunidad, en el caso de la INSEADA de la Valeria. Normalmente, en el caso de las comunidades tradicionales y pueblos indígenas en Brasil, es un tema muy delicado hablar de relocación, porque ni siempre es una opción justa y ni siempre es una opción que cuenta con una evaluación de autoridades y de expertos en esos términos. No tenemos en Brasil, por ejemplo, parámetros legales a nivel nacional. Las iniciativas están siendo desarrolladas a nivel local, pero lamentablemente no contamos, por ejemplo, con un marco legal para orientar el poder público. Entonces, desde mi perspectiva, es muy importante desarrollar iniciativas locales que puedan también inspirar trabajos de incidencia. Todavía contamos con un contexto no muy favorable, pero las iniciativas locales existen y creo que nuestro rol como red es interconectar a las personas, las ideas, las pesquisas, las investigaciones también. Y por eso desde Rezama estamos ampliando nuestro trabajo con una nueva iniciativa, que es el Observatorio sobre Movilidad Humana, Cambio Climático y Desastres, en una alianza con la Universidad para la Paz en Costa Rica, para también promover más alianzas, más conexiones, más interrelaciones entre académicos, porque lo que pienso es que nos falta un grande mapeo de proyectos, ideas de personas, porque mucho es hecho en nuestra región, y hablo de Latinoamérica, pero no estamos tan integrados y articulados como deberíamos para no hacer un doble trabajo.
Erica,
entonces, un otro ejemplo para finalizar es el ejemplo de la isla Providencia y Catalina en Colombia, que me solicitaron apoyo como abogada experta en migración ambiental, en sus categorías, movilidad humana en contexto de desastres. Yes?
Oh, Maria, we have a message from Alejandro. If you could ask Erica to please switch over to the Spanish language channel, just so we can hear all of the rich content that she's saying in the Spanish language channel, then we can hear you, Maria, on this channel. Okay. Thank you.
Okay,
thank you. I'm so sorry. Thank you.
Este último caso es el caso de Providencia y Catalina en Colombia. Es un caso también de isla. que fue afectada por el huracán Iota en noviembre de 2020, y en este caso fue solicitado de mi parte un apoyo jurídico como experta para una organización que estaba apoyando a esta comunidad. Y cuando percibí el caso, le pregunté e intenté entender un poco, comprender mejor quiénes son esas personas, cómo viven esas personas, qué demandas tenían, y percibí que en este caso no podría hablar de relocación, que aparentemente sería la solución para la gente, pero el contexto local de explotación económica, especulación inmobiliaria, podría generar la desterritorialización de esta comunidad. Entonces, es un tema, la relocación es un tema súper sencillo, súper delicado y complejo, y tiene que ver muchísimo con el contexto local. Entonces, esta comunidad, por ejemplo, tiene todo un contexto muy, muy delicado, y mismo con el plan de reconstrucción de la isla, que fue 98% destruida con este huracán, esta reconstrucción no respetó los modos de vida de la comunidad, y muchas veces esta estrategia de relocar puede significar otras amenazas a esta comunidad por también perder sus territorios para otras personas, para otros objetivos. Entonces, la participación de la comunidad es fundamental por distintas razones, pero principalmente en este punto porque un impacto de destrucción como este en esta isla, que debilitó el tejido social comunitario, una parte de la comunidad se desplazó a una otra isla, por ejemplo, pero el núcleo de la comunidad se quedó, y hizo la exigencia de permanecer y reconstruir en el mismo territorio por el miedo, el temor de perderlo, y ese temor era verdadero porque poco después había un intento de construir una base militar cerca de la comunidad, cerca de ese territorio afectado por este huracán. Entonces, si no me equivoco, es el primer caso de desplazamiento climático en toda Latinoamérica que está en una Corte Constitucional Nacional. La Corte Constitucional de Colombia, hay una demanda judicial, hay una acción, por eso también fui solicitada para darle un apoyo, pero la acción fue propuesta por la propia comunidad, por abogados comunitarios apoyados por otras organizaciones, y está pendiente de decisión en la Corte Constitucional de Colombia, que aceptó esta demanda y tiene que se posicionar sobre un estatus de desplazamiento climático específicamente en este caso. Entonces, estas estrategias de litigio climático son estrategias importantes, pero la gente no puede esperar, porque son estrategias también que demandan mucho tiempo, y la gente sigue ahí sin un plan de reconstrucción para esta comunidad, en una situación de completo abandono e injusticia. Entonces, me gustaría solo traer un poco estos múltiples casos, y hay otros también en distintos países, pero que nos muestran que no hay una solución única, y sin considerar las voces de las comunidades, porque hay muchas estrategias que muchas veces no conocemos y que muchas veces pueden ser mejor aceptadas en el caso que la relocación sea la única solución, pero en otros casos también puede ser una solución que pensada con la comunidad pueda incorporar sus conocimientos, estrategias y sus necesidades y derechos, no solo sus necesidades, pero derechos, y también que sea un proceso, como mi colega Yola ya expuso, con una acepción de justicia más amplia, no solo económica, pero mirando también los valores, las tradiciones. Específicamente hablo de esas comunidades tradicionales que tienen una relación muy estrecha con su territorio, que son parte de su vida y de su identidad. Entonces, estoy también disponible para la discusión y quería muchísimo agradecer también al servicio de intérpretes y de traducción que me proporcionó todo el apoyo para que esté aquí hoy con ustedes. Muchas gracias. Desde Latinoamérica es un gusto aquí estar con mis compañeras y mis compañeros de las Américas, todos juntos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you too. Obrigada. Gracias.
Obrigada.
There's so
Obrigada
many
en portugués.
examples from Brazil that you mentioned that are germane everywhere. And the trust factor with government is so important. In Brazil, the history of relocation is very negative. People being relocated from favelas that are being gentrified. In the Amazon, people going to the Amazon with false advertising. A land without people, for people without land, was what the military dictatorship did to try to get people to move from the cities of Brazil to the north. And a lot of that created a lot of trouble too. And the scale issue, the guidebook sounds really interesting. I'd love to hear more about the guidebook. Because Kristen too has sort of a protocol and that listening. How do you do this? How do you scale this up so that it's not so particular to each community? But then keeping in mind each community's particular nature is really challenging. Siders, I know you have many thoughts building off of what we've heard so far.
Always, yes, thanks. And I don't know, thanks. I'm just going to start by saying I love the fact that we're having this conversation. Just the fact that we can have a whole session dedicated to talking about climate change and people moving. Right? I think when a lot of us started working on this, even a decade or 2 decades ago, that was sort of taboo to talk about. And so it's amazing to just see how that conversation is changing. And just the fact that we can have that conversation is a major step forward, right? To be able to, we don't have answers to a lot of the questions yet, but the fact that we can even ask those questions, I think is really important. I'm going to share, I promise, just a very few slides, and they're going to be very serious ones too. So hopefully that starts up and you can see my very serious introduction. So I'm going to take a very honest approach to the how I got where I got here and why I work on the things I did, which may backfire. So we'll see how that goes. But the answer is sort of serendipity, which is why we have just happy accidents. Anyone in the chat who's been asking about law school, in my opinion, was I've come to think of it as a happy accident rather than a mistake. But I can't say that during law school I necessarily thought it was the right place for me to be. So it's been a happy accident. And in terms of why I now work on climate change adaptation and managed retreat, it's partly, a lot of it is because of serendipity, but also because of Hurricane Sandy, which is that central issue there, and then the Navy. So I worked for the Navy for 2 years as a fellow doing various analyses and things. And one of the projects I was working on was their capacity building efforts. So this is a photo from us working in Ghana, working on capacity building for navies. And so this got me very interested in thinking about how do you build capacity of organizations, of communities, of systems, et cetera. And I started working at the the Center for Climate Change Law in New York about a month before Hurricane Sandy hit. So then, of course, all that shifted to how do we think about Hurricane Sandy and the issues that happened there. And this came up with sort of the 2 big questions I think about a lot with my research, so sort of what motivates me, right? And this first one is, are we doing enough? Yeah, when we think about adaptation writ large, like, are we doing anything? Are we moving the dial? We're doing lots of stuff. There's so much adaptation happening, but so much of it is fiddling on the margins. It's not really addressing the problem, right? It's the Red Queen running and running and running to try to stay in the same place and not making any advance. And so I think that's a big challenge. The Global Adaptation Mapping Initiative and the latest IPCC report both come out with this idea that looking at the state of adaptation across the world, most of the adaptation that's happening is small scale and very incremental. So incremental that when we sent our paper for peer review, some of the reviewers said that's not climate change adaptation, right? Because it's things like irrigating farms and turning the air conditioner on when it's hot out. Like that's what we're doing in terms of climate change adaptation. And that sounds laughable because those of us sitting in this room know the scale of the problem that we're trying to deal with. And it's far beyond, right, turning the AC on or turning it higher. But that's what we're doing right now. And so one of the things I think about a lot is how do we think about taking bolder action? What does that mean, right? What does it mean to take more transformative action? And is that a good thing, right? Being bolder and more audacious isn't necessarily always for the best, but it's also a problem if we're not doing enough. So I really think about this like, are we taking action? Are we taking the right action? And are we moving the dial on this? And then the other thing I really want to think about is what do we actually know versus what we think we know. And I think this is especially true in the managed retreat space. I think we think we know a lot of things. And I think we know things because we all have like 1 or 2 cases in the back of our heads that we use as reference points. And we think about those things and we assume that those cases apply everywhere else, even though we know they don't. Right? It takes us a moment to get over that initial bias. For example, when I talk to people about the coast in the US, right? And they'll say something about the coast and they'll say, oh, but it's all those rich people on the coast. And I'm like, you have the Hamptons in mind. Let's shift and talk about the Gulf of Mississippi, where it's not, right? The Hamptons. Or vice versa. They'll say, oh, it's all these really low income communities. And I'll say, but also Key West, right? And so depending on what you have in your mind when you start making these decisions, you can come to very different decision point. And, Andy, you just mentioned scaling up, right? It's that challenge of we can often find solutions that work in one context in one particular place, but do they translate anywhere else? And as a lawyer, I often think about rules we're making, right? So when we make grand sweeping statements about relocation must always be voluntary, I'm going to be trying to controversial today. So should it always be voluntary? Do we mean always, even for like those rich white people who are building their 3rd vacation home on a place that won't exist and will cost the government billions of dollars to protect? Like really, always, right? Or do we mean that in most cases? Yeah, and we have some places in mind where we really think that. So I wonder about what we know. And this came to mind really when I started working on this because after Hurricane Sandy, people didn't want to talk about retreat. And I thought this was so fascinating because I talked to local officials who would tell me that they thought retreat was illegal, un-American, something that didn't happen, and that's something that people didn't want. And I thought, that's fascinating. FEMA has a database of thousands of homes that have relocated. There are 2,000 people in New York who have just asked for a buyout. Right? And it's absolutely not illegal. This is something that's happened for decades or centuries across the US. So like any good lawyer, I spent the next year documenting all the ways they were wrong. And so that's how I first got into this foray, right? Was thinking about all those reasons. But it really raised this question for me of what do we know and what do we think we know? And I think this is a big challenge for us as we think about adaptation in general and about managed retreat in particular is we often know something about what one stakeholder group thinks, or we know something about one particular case, but we don't know about everyone involved in that. And we might get one snapshot in time. And these are things that really matter over time. And so we also don't know how these things change over time. So for example, people who relocate, right, they have fewer social networks because their social networks have been disrupted. Well, we know from the disaster relocation space that that's true up until about 3 years after. And then people start rebuilding new social networks and they create new place attachment. But you know what? The managed retreat literature in the United States, the longest term study we have is 3 years. So we don't know. We don't know if people who relocated, 5 years later are doing better or not. So I think these questions are just really things that that clue in for me. And I just put this map up here because this is a map of just where FEMA alone has funded relocation across the United States. So it's roughly 1,100 counties in every state except Hawaii. So just one of those things when we think about managed retreat, Jola, you made this point right in the beginning, that we think about this as though it's a future issue, but it's also a right now issue. And everyone, you've all mentioned ahead of me, cases of this happening, but it's something to remember that it's happening and we do have expertise on it. And just the last thing I want to mention is, well, maybe I don't know, I'll go with this one. Thinking about something controversial to talk about today in our discussion, I guess, is that one of the controversial opinions I'd like to put out there, at least for discussion, is that I think the United States in particular, but many places around the world need to embrace the fact that climate change means we are not going to protect the status quo, and that we shouldn't protect the status quo. And that most of our adaptation to date has been about trying to keep what we have today and protect it against the future. And that makes sense up to a point, and then it doesn't make sense anymore. Yeah, maybe that makes sense if you're building a 5-foot wall, but not if you're building a 30-foot wall. Yeah, and so, and maybe we should do something aside from building walls, right? Just a thought, right? We could do something different there too. And so I offer that because I think if we start thinking about the future not as, oh, we have to hold on to everything we have, but instead we have to hold on to certain key aspects that we really care about, and we can let other things go and other things change. It opens up a lot more creative space for us to do much more exciting things with climate change adaptation, other than just build walls or put things on stilts. I mean, like, those are fine, but I think we can do a lot more exciting work in that space, especially if we make this a more holistic effort. So one of the things that was really exciting about Erica's chapter in the book, and about some of the other projects Jola has been doing as well, is thinking about the role of art in this space, thinking about the role of heritage, and how we can get heritage and art and literature. And I mean, I'm into video games now on climate change. Like, how do we use all of these things to create a really whole of society view about what we want the future to look like and about what we care about preserving from the past, right? And so like, there's a lot of creativity we can use there if we can break ourselves away from the idea that what we're trying to do is maintain, like, to hold the ocean back, to hold the climate, to hold everything exactly the way it is. So thanks.
Well, this is a very rich goulash. So many individual points, but there are themes here for sure. You know, one, as I mentioned earlier, is scaling. And I'm reminded of Andrew Krushevitz at the IRI at Columbia. You can look it up. He works with the International Red Cross on flash flood awareness and warning. He's more on the preparedness side. But what he's talked about is, and is actually writing about, is the need for professionalizing some of this. Who is the person? Who is the Kristen? You know, what does that look like? How many of those people are there? What do we need? How do you sustain a conversation with the community over time? One thing Kristen's project demonstrated, which I learned at one of the Columbia Managed Retreats meetings, was it takes time to build the trust and the awareness of who can do what. I'm writing right now about wildfire recovery, and you know, the distrust is huge. And so let's talk about that. What does success look like? And maybe each of you could get at that from your vantage point. 20 years from now, is there a new discipline? Is there a new practice? Is there a new way to use communication tools so that everything you've been describing, the gaps, are being filled? And maybe we'd start with Kristen. I kind of paid attention to your Consensus Institute early on. We'll start with you, and then Jola, and then we'll go around. What would that look like?
I think for me, it would look like a change fundamentally in the process and kind of the awareness of people who do have the power and the influence to shape policy and local planning processes. Like, what if you actually, you know, really got to know the community members well? What if you co-created the approach from the very, very beginning? Like, they co-create the identification of the problem. I think one of the things that we've learned over the last year is that, you know, even when we thought we were partnering early, we actually weren't partnering early enough. And we had to keep going back further and further so that you're actually focusing on building the relationship first and understanding the story and the history first and the context before you even like come to an agreement on what the problem is and what you might do about it. It's like humanizing the process, right? Like, yeah. These are other people on this planet. Why can't we, you know, get to know each other? And I think one of the hardest pieces about that, you know, in my upbringing is, you know, the action, you know, the need to produce, the need for action, the need to have the solution, is something that's has been drilled into my brain as a student in America, as a family member in America, by my parents. Like, you need to have the answer. And one of the things that I was called out on personally by community leaders was, you don't have the answer. In fact, you haven't even asked the right question. And you know, it's okay not to have the answer. It's actually better to just acknowledge that the problem exists rather than glossing over it because you don't have an answer. So stop and say, yes, actually what you're saying, like, validate that the problem exists, rather than like, oh, you raised something really difficult and uncomfortable, I'm going to jump over it and go over here to something that I think I know more about and I can talk about. So I just feel like there's these like fundamental things that I would love to see change in how we think about program design and program service and planning processes that I think could make a huge difference. Not, I mean, we're just talking about one little sector of policy. Like, all sectors of policy right now need a very fundamental change in trust building across political divides.
Although, again, what we were just describing, in a way, that's the opportunity. That building that.
Yeah.
Building the relationship building, trust building part is there for preparedness, for energy transition, for relocation, where that's the issue. Heat, you know, as Eric Kleinenberg's work showed, communities that are connected to each other are more resilient to heat. So anyway, that general property is so valuable that way. But then who owns it? We'll talk about that. Like, how does that happen? So Jola, again to you. Again, Nigeria, Makoko, I haven't been there, but I wrote about it a couple of years ago. What's success look like?
When you say what success looks like, I think what comes to my mind is success for whom, right? Exactly. So some of the work that I presented to you today was really trying to look at success from the perspective of communities that were relocated. So if you look at that, there are different stories which I'll share very quickly. But then there could be issues of success from the perspective of communities that are receiving this community, which could look very different. And it could also look very different from the perspective of policymakers or planners that are engaged in this process. So we need to first of all clarify for success for whom. The other issue that I think is also important for us to be mindful of is also the scale of success we're talking about, right? So if you have a place where you have 300 people or 200 people you want to relocate, and they come together, they have a social contract and agree that they want to relocate, you could perhaps be able to do it. When you're relocating, let's say, 10,000 people, it gets very difficult. So again, the scale is different, but also the timeline. So one of the examples of the cases that I would quickly mention is the case of the Fiji, which we classified as successful. There are some struggles with that, but overall, the people themselves defined as successful. Different papers classified as successful. But one of the key things that I think stood out to me was also the fact that it took years. I think it took more than maybe almost 20 years to get it done. And this is the conversation the communities have been having among themselves, that they do need to relocate. It wasn't an outsider that came and said you had to relocate to Kenani. They wanted to do it. So it took years to even implement. And the other thing was also that the church got involved, right? So there are things that matter to people to help facilitate the conversations about relocation. And so getting the right people to be in that room to help people think through what they wanted to do and to make that happen, and happen in a way that actually radically shift their life for the better, I think, and looking at it from their perspective, is it successful? Even when they say it was successful, there will be like, different gaps where, in the Fiji case, for instance, they felt, our ancestral forefathers that were buried on the coast, we couldn't move them. And so they still felt that there were things that didn't quite work. But the younger people were excited because they moved into this modern sort of relatively home with, solar panels, and that's supposed to be, and the housing that's supposed to be more resilient. So there are different dimensions to what success could be for community. The question is, the relocation, that if any relocation happens, does it move closer to the goals that the community has for themselves? and how can practitioners or researchers work with community to implement what they define for themselves that could be successful. So I'll stop there because of time, but yeah.
No, those are great points. And as you're all thinking, I'm going to go around, but there was a really good question that came in from Victor, and I just copied it. Where did I put it? Do you know platforms or institutions that monitor the long-term disaster recovery process? It's a really good question. But then again, let's go around. Erica, success 20 years from now, when you're or my age, and there's a new young practitioner emerging, what's the normal landscape look like in South America? What would success look like?
Bueno, en mi experiencia, que no es obvio, todavía tan larga, yo creo que el fundamento de los problemas que enfrentamos en el tópico más general de la movilidad humana relacionadas a desastres y migraciones ambientales no es un problema, en mi visión, jurídico, es un problema más político porque el tema es que el trabajo de relocación de personas exige compromiso. Entonces, ni todas las autoridades se comprometen con los actores que están involucrados en este proceso. Entonces, no es un tema muy fácil y en este punto estoy de acuerdo una vez más con Kristen sobre el momento de establecer relaciones, porque hay experiencias de gente que ya está se adaptando sin relocarse, por ejemplo, en regiones de la Amazonía, en comunidades que están a las márgenes de los ríos, pero este movimiento no se percibe como migración y no se quiere nominarlo como migración. Y estas iniciativas no son apoyadas una vez más por las autoridades. Como yo creo, no conozco profundizadamente el trabajo de Kristen, pero en la Amazonía muchos de estos procesos de adaptación al cambio climático y migración, no hablo de relocación específicamente, pero de esos movimientos circulares, sazonales, son políticas públicas que no son oficiales. Entonces, ahí tenemos que urgentemente establecer esta interconexión con los actores en un momento antes. Porque en ese caso, por ejemplo, de la comunidad de Enseada, otras comunidades que están en el mismo territorio están pasando por el mismo problema ahora, pero hay una dificultad extrema de diálogo para que esas personas tengan, porque todavía ya están afectadas, para que se reloquen antes que perdan todo y que puedan perder sus vidas también en este proceso. Entonces, la comunidad de Enseada, elaborando su protocolo, ahora se generó un protocolo más grande de todo este territorio ocupado por 9 comunidades. ¿Por qué? Porque este ejemplo de la comunidad de Enseada, aunque muy complejo, se reproduciendo con otras comunidades de este mismo territorio, porque quieren también algunas que no están en este estágio crítico, quieren se anticipar. Pero esto, repito, hay un problema de comprometimiento muy grave y para nosotros académicos, y yo no soy tan académica, pero más investigadora, más independiente, es un tema de compromiso, porque siempre cuando hay una demanda comunitaria, yo dejo todo lo que estoy haciendo y estoy con ellos, por ejemplo, pero no son todos los investigadores que quieren hacer esto, porque esto demanda tiempo, mucho trabajo y también mucho sueño, porque no puedo dormir en paz viendo que mis compañeros ahí en la comunidad están en esta situación. Entonces, tenemos también que pensar en una otra manera de hacer investigación compromisada con la comunidad y trayéndolos. Siempre que puedo, por ejemplo, los traigo para hablar en primera persona. Yo me considero un instrumento tejiendo y haciendo puentes entre las personas. Entonces, creo que el tema de responsabilidad tenemos que hacerlo, pero mi preocupación es que dejemos todo para el litigio, que es algo que toma mucho tiempo y las comunidades no tenemos ese tiempo más. No tenemos ese tiempo. Entonces, tenemos que hacerlo en la práctica. Yo entiendo y comparto de las preocupaciones de mi colega Saez, porque creo que tenemos que pensar en parámetros macro, pero en mi visión y en mi experiencia y con mis capacidades no estoy logrando hacerlo. Y eso me incomoda muchísimo y me preocupa muchísimo también, porque sé que a nivel global no hay esta responsabilización. Las COPes pasan COP a COP, los temas se agravan y no hay una responsabilización. Ese es el tema. Y toda vez que hay un esfuerzo, en mi visión, es top-down. No vamos a avanzar así, ¿no? Sin las personas que tienen sus territorios afectados, sin tomar la palabra y sin tomar los procesos y los procesos participativos, sea a nivel local, regional, subnacional y otros también. No están siendo involucradas las personas. Reciben todas esas agendas, todos esos proyectos, todos esos lineamientos, pero no participan de ellos, no saben también cómo aplicarlos. Nuestro rol como académicos está a su lado. Yo veo esto con mi poca experiencia comunitaria, que la gente está luchando todo el día para mantenerse vivo, mantener vivo su territorio. No hay tiempo para hacer lo que nosotros hacemos. Esta combinación de capacidades es fundamental para cualquier decisión en cualquier escala, creo. Es mi visión. Pero es una visión apasionada, pero es la experiencia que tengo para compartir con ustedes. Muchas gracias.
That was so well said, so well articulated, and so important. I'm going to ask there's a question in the that's in Spanish. I didn't know, Alejandro, if maybe you can read it. It's unless that's a reply from AR, from CIDERS, I'm not sure. If not, maybe someone can translate it. I don't know if you can see
I think they've been translating some of the questions and the responses.
Okay. Oh, I see. Oh, that's what's going on. Oh, good. Good.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, one other question I want to toss into the mix, and I see more there, and all of you should feel free, if you see something in the Q&A, to just dive at it. But it's about funding, money. Indra Overland and Sovakul 2 years ago did a study of social science funding compared to natural sciences. I hate that, natural sciences. In climate mitigation, policy, mitigating emissions. And it's this like tiny fraction of science funding goes into the social sciences. But as I introduced this show, the social climate is determining so much of what happens in the world in terms of harm, injustice. And I assume that funding gap is worse on the adaptation side, the relocation side, the whatever you want to call it. So, and there's a bias against funding capacities, funding programs, as opposed to a study with a beginning, middle, and an end, or a project, the same dimensions. A lot of what's described here is building capacities that will endure. How does that get funded? So, sorry.
Are you asking for
posted
social scientists if social science should get more money? Because yes, I think we all, yes, it should get more funding.
But let's
especially the lawyers. Yeah.
but historically knowing why it isn't happening, part of which is the qualitative data question. What needs to change for that to be normalized?
Well, I'll start with a rant. Sure. So, I mean, social science is undervalued sort of across everything, right? Social scientists are paid less than natural scientists. Yeah, if you want to make money, don't become a social scientist, except lawyers. You can become a lawyer, but don't become a geographer or something in academia. You'll make less.
I don't have money.
Even as grad students, you might make less than you will if you're an engineering student or an engineering faculty, right? You won't have a lab, so you won't need expensive lab equipment. So that's possible. You might not have field research the same way. I mean, pay to go to field, but not pay to, for all the expensive lab equipment and things like that. So that adds up to it. But I think larger, there's, to your point on qualitative data, people just dismiss it, right? The number of conversations, when I went to get my PhD and I was told, why do you need a PhD? You have a JD, you already know how to talk to people. And I thought, oh, wow, I love that that's all you think there is to all of any social science, right? It's just knowing how to talk to a person. That clearly there's a disrespect for the idea of rigor and validity and real research in these areas. And I think that's a problem. And especially when you see all these interdisciplinary teams, right? There are some wonderful interdisciplinary teams that do really integrative work. And then I'm sure many people on this call have had the experience of, hey, we're going to do the real science. Could you just go talk to some people, after we do the science? Or my favorite is, we're going to do this science and then you figure out how policy will use it to change the world. And I'm like, that's great. No one needs it. Why are you doing that? We had a whole conversation, for example, at ocean monitoring system, and we all sat down and talked about what we needed. And notably, no one said more ocean monitoring data. No one in an entire conference on ocean monitoring said that a gap was more monitoring data. But where the funding was going was to more data monitoring, right? So I think sometimes there's a disconnect there as well, which is really important. Anyway, so I think there's movement here to try to do more on the social sciences, but it's really hard to get people to respect it. And then, sorry, I'm ranting too much. I'll let everyone else rant as well. I think there's also a more societal issue, especially around climate change and adaptation, at least that I often see, which is that lots of people are looking for a technical fix, right? They don't want the solution to be, right, hey, we need to have hard conversations and long integrated processes and community conversations. They want the solution to be build a concrete wall and be done in 6 months. Right? They don't want the longer behavioral fix. I always make the diet analogy, right? Everyone wants the quick pill. No one wants the long eat my veggies. Like everyone wants the quick technological fix. And so I think there's this hope, this false optimism that we will somehow be able to get away from climate change, or, it's the techno optimism, right? We will solve ourselves out of it with the next whatever, the next gadget, Wizmo, whatever it is, will solve everything for us. And we won't have to actually make hard choices or have hard conversations or think about things like ethics and culture and heritage and community. And so I think the more we buy into that, right, the more we say that, oh, it's okay, we can solve this, and the less we say, hey, this is going to be hard and we have to do the hard work, the more we will continue to devalue the social sciences. All right, sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now.
By the way, I do notice that Robert O'Connor has his hand up. I hadn't been looking for hands. I was looking for written comments. If it's okay, we have only 3 minutes left. So before the closing remarks, but from Lori, I'm not sure if we can fit that in, but maybe Robert.
I promise I'll be very quick. Siders, you're right. I run a social science program at the National Science Foundation.
I don't see a way to unmute. Let's see. I'm not sure if I can.
Oh, I'm hearing him.
I'm not hearing him for some reason.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear him.
Okay, yes, I'll be quick. Siders, you're right.
So those who can hear him, just answer his question.
Okay,
Siders or Jola, can you tell us what Bob is saying? Because some of us can't hear him for some reason.
I'll repeat. Bob, go for your comment and I'll repeat.
No, just really quickly, and then you can translate. Thank you, Siders. Siders, you're right. A problem is that the standing programs in the Social Science Directorate at the National Science Foundation have the same budgets we've had since 2012. I'll repeat that. We haven't gotten increased budgets since 2012. Although ironically, we're more respected throughout the foundation. That is, our colleagues in the natural sciences keep saying, look, we need you. And increasingly, it's not just the add-on CIDRs. It used to be when I came in 2001, it was almost inevitably, okay, we do the real stuff, the real innovation, and you guys got to help to sell it. That, we've got a silver bullet and so and so. You guys, the role of social science is to sell it. Well, increasingly on these interdisciplinary things, we are involved together. One reason we could fund more is if you guys send me more good proposals. My program is Decision, Risk, and Management Sciences. We don't have a set aside for disaster-related stuff, but we don't have a limit either. So the more really good proposals you guys send, and there is a discussion tomorrow on the agenda about how to get money out of the National Science Foundation, and I'll be quiet. Thank you for incredible panel, by the way.
Thank you for
guys
that
are
comment.
Great. Really appreciate it. You guys are incredible.
I'm so glad you like it. Yeah,
that was great. That was a
many
great
of you
comment.
heard the ending. I just want to note the thing you said in the very beginning, Bob, for those of you who weren't switched to the right audio channel yet, was that the social science directorates haven't had a budget increase since 2012. So in the last decade, haven't had an increase in their funding there, and that's a challenge. Yeah,
that's not quite true. We've had it, but the standing programs haven't had any.
The standing programs, yeah.
We actually have doing much more on broadening participation. Very serious work in that area.
Well, frankly, that's a fantastic. We're at 4:57 my time, 2:57 there, which is sort of when we're supposed to turn over to Lori. I'm just going to reiterate that I always see any discussion I'm involved with as a beginning, not an end. I am happy to host as many future discussions on my webcast, Sustain What, as are necessary to take this to some new level. I've already done a bunch on these issues, and it's where I live. Others are working on solar panels and stuff, and I see so much opportunity here. So I'll just say, keep that as an open invitation. I'm very easy to find, about as easy to find as anybody. And thank you for letting me be part of this conversation today, and let's get at it and take this further. So over to Lori, and thank you again and to the staff for writing her on this workshop.
Thank you, and I hope the audience, I wish we were all together in a room. I can feel the thunderous applause, and I wish I could hear it. And so please keep your gratitude coming in the chat for this panel. And Andy, thank you for stepping up and moderating this so beautifully, and for all you do for the public communication of science. CIDRs and JOLA, the original partners in good trouble for this session. Thank you for bringing us your work and bringing Kristen and Erica into this panel. The five of you, really a magnificent conversation, and would be remiss if we also didn't say to the Community Language Cooperative, thank you for your commitment to inclusion, justice, and recognizing that language is power and our words bind us together. And so thank you. And I'm just going to take this last minute here to share my slides and to have a couple of announcements for this afternoon and what's coming this evening, or early evening Colorado time. So everyone, we're going to have a 30-minute break after this, and then please come back. We have 5 amazing concurrent sessions on 5 really important topics. Then we'll have a 30-minute break. And then this evening from 5:30 to 6:30, in lieu of our barbecue, we're going to have 4 virtual social hours and roundtables on cross-sector collaboration, gender and disasters, healthcare, and humans, animals, and climate change. So I hope you'll stick around into the evening and have some good cheer with us after a great day. Also want to note that the fabulously talented Elise Birnbach has been churning out graphic recordings. We now have the keynote in yesterday morning's plenary available. So look out on social media and the Hazard Center website for that. Tomorrow is the official Disaster Dash Day, even though you can run anytime or walk in July. So hope you will sign up if you haven't already, and you can find more about that on our website, how to get involved. And thank you to the Bill Anderson Fund If you are attending this workshop and looking for continuing education credits, you can find more on our Hazard Center webpage, and also reach out to us at hazards.workshop@colorado.edu if you need more information from Katie about getting your credits. And thanks to the Association of State Floodplain Managers and the International Association of Emergency Managers for your partnership that makes these continuing education credits possible for our participants. As Bob O'Connor teed up, after this workshop ends, we have a researchers meeting that follows, and we're going to have a session with Bob and 3 other National Science Foundation program officers, as well as nearly 200 presentations. Still time to sign up for that add-on researchers meeting, and also for the National Hazard Mitigation Association practitioners meeting. And then last but not least, it is now time for our 30-minute break. Have a rejuvenating, restorative time away from the screen, and we'll see you back here for the concurrent sessions. Thank you again to the panel and to all the participants. We'll see you soon. Thank you.